Hello guys, thank you for tuning in again to the Edge of the Matrix YouTube channel. I really do appreciate you tuning in. As such, I've tried to make it look a little bit more professional. I've even bought a neon sign there in the background. Anyway, today I'm going to talk to you about, well, I'm not going to talk to you about it. I'm going to have a discussion with a very knowledgeable person on electromagnetic frequencies, and in particular, are they safe for our bodies? Because nowadays we are constantly surrounded by these EMFs. We've got Wi-Fi from our routers, Bluetooth from our phones, we've got 4G, 5G radiation coming from the mass, and many more of these frequencies surrounding the atmosphere that we're in. People have called it an electromagnetic smog. And what is this doing to our bodies? Because we don't have any long-term research, because it's a relatively new phenomena. So is it safe, or should we be worried? Now, IAN JARVIS knows a lot about this topic. Ian studied computer science. He has a degree in computer science. He spent 30 years working in the information technology sector. He also trained in anatomy and physiology and complementary therapies, and he's used this knowledge to treat people's bodies. So this is quite a diverse field of knowledge, and because Ian possessed this knowledge, he recognised really early on that the rollout of these wireless technologies wouldn't be very good for our bodies. So I sat down with Ian to discuss this topic and learn about the potential dangers of the electromagnetic frequencies that we are constantly exposed to on a daily basis. So I hope you enjoy the video discussion, guys. Please stay tuned until the end, because Ian explains what you can do about it if you're concerned, and he gives his details where you can contact him, and he will travel up and down the country and give talks to audiences who are willing to listen. So hope you enjoy the video, guys. Thank you again for tuning in. Okay, Ian, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay, Steve. I spent 30 years in IT, starting around about 19, after I'd done a degree. Well, I'd already been doing work in IT before I did a degree in computing science at Teesside Polytechnic, as it then was. And so I spent all those 30 years. Of course, going back all those years, I retired around about the 2000. Well, when I say retired, I sort of stopped doing IT work and around about 2000. So those 30 years started in 1970, 1968, I think, was when I started working, 67, 68. And it was building systems, software development, systems analysis, all that sort of thing for those 30 years. Of course, we'd not had online systems coming in until the very late part of that career, and PCs, of course, came online as well. So lots and lots of technological changes. I'd also trained or educated in complementary therapy, body therapy, so treating bodies. So I'd done anatomy and physiology as part of that training. So when radio frequency wireless communications came, initially it was all wired, of course, and then the wireless communication started coming on, and I recognized from that knowledge both of IT and of anatomy through the body work that it was not all going to be good, because we knew, and in fact have known since the early part of last century, that radio frequencies in their variety of forms do have an effect on biological tissue. So that combination, and when I saw 3G coming along, that was when I got my first Wi-Fi system, because I moved onto a narrowboat on the canal at that time. I'd had, internet connection through a variety of means, always wired up until that point. But when I moved onto the boat, I got a wireless system, because you can't have a landline on a boat. on the canal. So that was when 3 first came out as well. That's about that same time.
The Company 3.
The Company 3, yeah. That it's called 3 because 3G. They'd never had a 2G or a 1G.
Okay.
Whereas Vodafone and other companies did, so that's why they called the Company 3, and then we went on from there. So when we started finding out that 3G and then 4G came along around about 2010, 11, 12 in this country, and that started ramping up the radiation levels in the country. And I was getting a little bit concerned about how far that was going to go. And then, of course, 2019 began the 5G rollout. Matt Warman started that. He was the Minister of State for whatever it was, everything digital at that time. So that ramped up my interest a little bit more. And of course that coincided with the COVID pandemic, etc., everything going on with that. And so that really brings us up to date. That's where I was. I moved to Birmingham. My sister lives in Birmingham. I came back from India in 2020. I volunteer in a clinic out in India. And then I moved up to Wolverhampton. And then we really started working on the applications and the looking at the rollout of 5G and what that was and what it meant to what's going on at the moment.
Okay, so why should the public be concerned about 5G?
I think there are lots of different reasons for that. It's we could go on for a long time probably, but I'll just cut it down to brief because people can contact me and more. After we started looking at the 5G in particular, not solely 5G, I must emphasize that.
Okay.
All the frequencies have effects, and they're not all good effects as well. But when I started looking at that and getting more and more into it, I realized that we needed to spread the information about. So I'd already done a little bit of speaking mainly on health topics and my work in India, and I realized the easiest way to get the information out to people was going to be write a speech, write a talk, a presentation. So I did that. And then I first of all gave the talk in Birmingham and Wolverhampton, which was where I was living, of course, the obvious place to start. And I honestly don't know how it happened because I'm rubbish at marketing, Steve. But suddenly I found people were asking me to go and give talks.
So they were concerned anyway before they'd actually heard you speak?
A lot of them began to be concerned as well, yeah. It's not just me, or there are lots of people around the country who recognise that there were negative effects, potentially adverse health effects, if you like. And there's an organisation which was created in the mid-90s called the International Commission on Non-Ionising Radiation Protection. Okay. They wrote a guideline, and that word is important, guideline. And that guideline actually said this is for the protection of humans, i.e. you and me, humans against substantiated is an important word as well, substantiated adverse health risk or effects. So that document right in the very beginning was saying there are adverse effects of radio frequency radiation to humans. It didn't look at anything else that was non-human, like fields of wheat, trees, animals, insects.
Birds.
It didn't look at those at all. And interestingly enough, nobody else is. It wouldn't be important if somebody else was, but nobody else is. So the fact that they recognised there were these adverse health influences, and they actually, in that paper, they give 3 mechanisms of how it can harm a human being.
Yeah, I think that's what people watching now would be interested in. They want to know how it actually affects them.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember exactly the three, but I know one of them at least is about the raising of temperature. It's mostly about the raising of temperature on that paper, so it's limited in its scope. But raising of temperature, body temperature, is one thing. The effects on the myelin sheath is another one. That's the sheath that goes around the nerves. All the nerves are covered by it. And then there's something which is called oxidative stress. And that's well recognized by many people, many scientists and doctors. And it is known that oxidative stress can cause cancer. Okay?
That's quite serious.
And in 2011, the International Association of Research on Cancer, which is part of the World Health Organization, actually classified radio frequency radiation as a class 2B carcinogen. That means it's probably carcinogenic. No, sorry, I get that wrong. It means it's possibly carcinogenic. 2A is probably carcinogenic, and 1 is absolutely definitely carcinogenic. Now that's a World Health Organization committee, so they should have quite a lot of influence, you would think. But the IGNA, when it was updated in 2012 and again in 2020, didn't really change their levels of their guideline levels of protection very much. They did add in that they now cater for 5G, but they also say the actual words that they say in that paper, which is about 40 pages long, 45 pages long, it says if the levels of radiation are below our guideline, then you are unlikely to suffer harm. Now, unlikely is not a very
not
a very medical
term,
or scientific term, is it?
There's no percentage.
There. And it didn't say it's less likely in adults, more likely in children, or anything like that, which actually is the case. So you've already got that in terms of in terms of knowledge about health, potential health effects. And even if we go back right to the beginning of the last century, there was already people doing research on electricity, radar, telephone lines, and they were seeing these health effects from all those things beginning to come along. And I think it was Dr. Beard, he was in the 19th century, he wrote that there was a strange new disease appearing. You know, I mean, going back to the early 1800s, cancer was almost unknown.
Yeah.
You know, so we need to think about that. And now, one of the other things that worried me was this cumulative effect, because if we go back again, even 50 years. When I started my career, as it were, the 1950s, there was hardly any radiation around in the public sphere, if you can use it. And now, if you look around at what's going on, how much radiation we've got now, we've even got that little thing which is called a smartphone, which is maybe not so smart. We've got our routers in our house, we've got our microwave ovens, we've got our smart meters in the cupboard, we've got all the masts going up. The old ones that were doing 4G still there, and we're introducing these 5G ones, and we've not really had time to research it and see exactly what the effects might be. And it's so difficult. We cannot reproduce in the lab the variation that we're getting from walking down the street even these days, and we're exposed to this all the time, and nobody is really knowing what the long-term effect is. And 5G has had very little actual research on human beings in the living situation.
Yeah, so one correlation will just be the number of cancer deaths, the increase, but you can't prove causation, of course.
Yes.
So it sounds like the variables are the length of time that you're exposed to these radio frequencies, the different types of radio frequencies, and the distance from them. So if you've got a mast that's just across the road from you, then you could be at more risk than other people. And then you might have another mast which is a few hundred metres away, and you've got crossover of the waves.
The way I often describe it is, remember when you played as a child, or even with children, dropping a stone in a still pond, and you get those ripples going out. Well, the waves from 4G are pretty much like that, except of course they're in 3 dimensions.
Right. Yeah.
And then you would have dropped another stone in a little bit distance away, and you see when those waves come together, they ripple and they make a destructive or an pattern of the interference between those waves. That again, that's the way that the 4G, everything up to 4G, was working. And now we're introducing 5G into that mix, we're not taking the 4G down, the 4G is staying there, and we're introducing 5G, which is a beam forming. I don't want to get too technical on this discussion at the moment, but it's actually aiming a beam at your mobile phone and somebody else's mobile phone who's sitting next to you. And if you think of a football stadium, if they were all using 5G, maybe it's just particularly true in America actually, if they got a 5G mast on or near or by the stadium, and everybody's using their mobile phone to look at the match and all the other things that they do these days. You can imagine all these beams crisscrossing across, going from your phone to the next door seat to the phone to the other side. So we've no idea really of how that mix is going to affect us, and that's the problem. We don't know.
Is there a list of symptoms for overexposure to radio?
There is.
Electromagnetic
It's quite a long list, potentially, and of course, in order to get to the cancer stage, if we're looking at that, it can be several years. We know that there are people with shall we say, sensitivity, particular sensitivity. There are canaries, like the canaries in the mine.
Of course, get it.
We should be really grateful for these people who are more sensitive than, because we're being bathed in it as much as they are. It's just that their senses are more finely attuned. I like to think of it as a better attunement than you or I to detect that. So we should really be listening to them and taking note. And I often say to people, you don't need the same level of scientific certainty to take an ethical or a political decision. You just need to know there's an uncertainty. And that's there, isn't it? And we're not making those decisions now.
They said in the paper that you just referenced, did you say that it could possibly cause, so there's your uncertainty, could possibly cause cancer?
Yes, the IARC paper, exactly. Yes,
so I've got one for you. Now, when I was young, long story, but I got my tooth knocked out, so I've had that placed with an implant, and I've got a titanium implant which is drilled up into my skull, so I've got some titanium within there.
Yes.
Other people have amalgam fillings, the mercury fillings. People have had bones pinned. People have piercings. So all sorts of different metallic implants. Now I know that antennas are metallic and they're used to transmit these radio waves. So would I be more susceptible because of my titanium implant? Would anybody that's got an implant, are they more susceptible to these electromagnetic frequencies?
Yes, Steve, you would. And in fact, you raise a very interesting question, because if we go back to ICNIRP, that paper I mentioned a few moments ago, in the very first 2 sections, it talks about the effect of metal in the body actually disrupting the signals of an EMF meter, or even an EMF device that is being used in the hospital, for example, and therefore they exclude from the standard anybody that has metal in their body. So how many people is that? We ask a question.
Yeah.
You know, and your titanium tooth is one example. Children's braces are often metal. As well, and all the other things that you mentioned, and also think about a contraceptive coil inside a woman. That again is metal. So lots of different things, and
quite an important area as well.
Lots of young women will have those in their bodies. Of course they will, and there are other things as well that we can think of. I think I mentioned to you earlier, when I was talking in Glastonbury, there were an audience of about 200 people, and I asked them to put their hand up if I mentioned something, a metal thing that they had in their body, and hold their hand up. By the time we'd finished, I only mentioned 5 or 6 things as I went through a list, and at the end of that, there was one person out of 200-ish who said she didn't have any metal in her body.
Wow.
So what does that mean?
Yeah.
Now, all those people with their hands up are excluded from the IGNUP guideline, which means if a mast goes up near your house and you are one of those, not that one person, you're not covered by that guideline.
Wow. So for people that are concerned after hearing this, what can they do about it?
Good question, Steve. Good question. Well, one of the first things, the way that we've been tackling this, I use the term we because I'm working with a group of people around the country. I have done, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 talks around the country, and everywhere from Aberdeen to Totnes, from Bangor to Ashford in Kent, and there's still a lot of gaps in the middle, of course, and I will go anywhere to explain this to them. So that's one thing, they can call me in. We have been primarily addressing the rollout of the 5G masts, particularly the 5G, but 4G is associated with it as well, and writing objections to our councils to refuse the planning applications, because every ground-based mast, every new ground-based mast has to have planning approval from the local council. Okay, so they've got to go through that process. There is a fast-track process, especially for, not just for telecoms, it works for other things as well, like agriculture and so on, but it's a special version of it for telecom companies. And we've had so that's the first thing they can do. They can look at that. They can go onto our website, which is standupwolverhampton.com, and look at the EMF page, and they can see some advice on how to put in an application, and also how to contact me as well. Or contact the team that I work with. We all work together. We've got mentors, 3 of them at the moment, Bill, Jane and Judith, who will advise anybody, help anybody. Again, there's an email on that website page. They can email and say, I've got an application here. But the first thing they need to do is find out how they can learn when there's a new application coming in their location, whether it's a city or a town or a village. And they need to learn out how to use the planning applications website, within their council website, and how to find that. That's the first thing. If you know there's one coming, you can do something about it. It's not much use giving us a ring or an email and saying, they've just put this mast up in my garden.
It's too late.
What do I do? It's much more difficult. There are possibly things we can do with that, but it's much, much more difficult. So getting in on the stage, and it's working as well.
Right.
We are having effect. I think it's Bristol has got about 80% refusals, maybe even more. I think Solihull is running about 70%. Birmingham was running about 70% as well. Other councils are not doing so well. Barrow-in-Furness just says no planning approval is needed, which is not true, actually. So there are aspects of that can be done. We're also looking at legal ways of doing it. As you know, also that some of the applications, they have to say that it's going to be compliant with that ICNIRP guideline that I mentioned earlier, but some of them are put in by non-existent companies, and I've been particularly chasing that one as well. So how can that be?
Yeah.
So there are legal avenues as well.
Right.
It gets very complicated, as you know. So the first step is, if you want to learn about it, a talk from me is a good first start.
Okay, so they can find you where? Do you want to repeat your website again?
Yes, the website is called Stand Up Wolverhampton.
Stand Up Wolverhampton.
I live in Wolverhampton,
Yep, okay.
and .com, I think is .com. And there's a page on there which says EMF and 5G, I think it actually says. That's the page to go to. There's an email for Sue, who sorts out my diary for me on a voluntary basis. We're all volunteers, and there's also an email for assistance, direct assistance with an application if you've actually started doing one. So an email to Sue and say, I heard Ian's talk with Steve. I'd really like to get in touch and see if we can get because she organises that sort of thing.
Great. And what people can do now is go to their council website, look under planning, and then put a search in to see if any masts are going up. And it's important that they keep doing that every week or every 2 weeks.
It's every week. They should do it every week and look back 2 weeks. Right. That's the important thing. Okay. At least once a week or twice a week.
Look back 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, there is on that website. There's I think there's 4 tutorial videos as well, and the first one shows people how to do that. Right. Most of the councils use a very similar piece of software that is that I use on the Wolverhampton website. Right. There are some that are different, and some are really hard to get into. Colchester's not easy. Wandsworth is even more difficult. Telford's a bit different, but usually, so if they can't follow it using that, then they get in touch with us, and either me or one of the mentors will get back to them and say, well, we'll have a look at your website with you and see if we can help you do that. Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah,
I think we're done.
Right.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks
very
for
much,
coming
Steve.
down. It's really nice to see you and to get to know you here in Stockport.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
My first visit to Stockport.
Yeah.